The official police report labeled it a tragic animal attack. Probably a rogue grizzly bear strayed too far south. But I know bears don't stand on two legs and stare at you with human eyes that have gone completely hollow. And bears definitely don't whisper your name through the cracks in the cabin walls in a voice that sounds like your brother drowning in gravel. We arrived at Blackwood Cabin just as the sun was dipping behind the sharp peaks of the pines, painting the sky in bruised purples and angry oranges. It was supposed to be a graduation celebration for my older brother, Mark, before he headed off to college. He brought his girlfriend, Chloe, and I tagged along because our parents insisted he include me. I didn't mind being the third wheel, mostly because I loved the cabin. It sat alone on the edge of a glassy, silent lake, miles down a dirt road that barely qualified as a trail. The isolation usually felt peaceful to me, a break from the noise of the city. We unpacked the SUV in the fading light, the air already turning crisp and smelling of pine needles and damp earth. Mark was full of energy, laughing loudly and swinging the heavy cooler like it weighed nothing. Chloe was smiling, taking photos of the sunset with her phone, even though we lost signal 5 miles back. I felt a strange unease settling in my stomach as the last of the daylight vanished. The woods around us seemed to step closer in the dark, the silence heavy and watchful. It felt less like we were alone and more like we were being observed by something very patient. The hairs on my arms stood up, a primal warning system screaming at me to get back in the car and drive away, but I ignored it, swallowing the fear down. The first few hours were normal enough. We got a fire crackling in the stone pit outside and grilled burgers until they were charred on the outside and pink in the middle, just the way Mark liked them. He was the golden boy of our family, strong, athletic, always sure of himself. Sitting there by the firelight, with his arm around Chloe, he looked invincible. I sat a little further back on a crooked log stump, sketching the outline of the trees in my notebook. The fire threw wild, dancing shadows against the wall of the cabin behind us. Around 10 o'clock, the atmosphere shifted. The wind died down completely, and the usual night sounds of crickets and rustling leaves just stopped. It was a sudden, absolute silence that felt heavy on my eardrums. Even Mark noticed it. He stopped mid-sentence, his head tilted toward the pitch-black tree line. "Weird," he mumbled, the easy smile dropping from his face. It got quiet fast. Chloe pulled her jacket tighter around herself. "It's freezing, too. Can you get more wood from the shed, Mark?" He nodded, grabbed a large flashlight, and headed toward the small shed located just beyond the glow of our fire. We watched his light bob away into the ink-black night, the beams swallowed instantly by the dense canopy of ancient trees that loomed over our small, fragile circle of safety. If you're watching this, subscribe, like, and let me know where you're watching from. It should have taken him 3 minutes, tops. The shed was maybe 50 feet away, just past where we parked the SUV. Chloe and I sat by the dying fire, feeding it small twigs to keep the light going. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The silence of the woods began to feel suffocating, pressing in on us from all sides. I kept straining my ears, waiting for the sound of Mark's boots crunching on the gravel or the thud of wood being stacked. "What is he doing over there?" Chloe asked, her voice tight with a nervousness she was trying to hide. "Maybe he couldn't find the axe," I suggested, though I didn't believe it. Mark could find anything. I stood up, needing to move. The beam of the firelight only reached so far, and beyond that edge, the darkness was absolute. It felt thick, like tar. A cold knot of dread formed in my chest. It wasn't just worry anymore. It was a primal instinct telling me something was very wrong. "I'll go check on him," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. I grabbed a smaller backup flashlight from the porch and stepped away from the safety of the fire. My heart hammered against my ribs with painful intensity, and my palms were slick with sweat around the metal casing of the flashlight as I walked into the suffocating gloom. I hadn't taken 10 steps when the sound tore through the night. It wasn't a normal shout or a call for help. It was a scream of pure, terrifying agony, guttural and wet, like nothing I had ever heard a human make. It was cut off abruptly by a sickening thud and the sound of heavy thrashing in the dry underbrush. Chloe shrieked and scrambled to her feet, clutching my arm so hard her nails dug in. "Mark! Mark, answer me!" There was no reply, just that horrible, heavy silence rushing back in to fill the space where the scream had been. We didn't discuss what to do. Panic took over. We both ran toward the sound, my flashlight beam cutting frantic zigzags through the trees. We found the woodshed door hanging open, creaking slightly. The large flashlight Mark had taken was on the ground, its lens cracked, the beam flickering weakly against a tree trunk. But Mark wasn't there. The ground near the shed was churned up, dirt and leaves kicked around violently. And there, splashing across the white wood of the shed door, was a bright, fresh spray of red blood. It dripped slowly down the grain of the wood, stark and horrifying in the weak light, a violent punctuation mark on the silence that had settled back over the woods. We screamed his name until our throats were raw, scanning the woods with our meager lights. Every shadow looked like a monster. Every snapping twig sounded like a threat. We were about to run back to the cabin to try the emergency landline, which we knew was unreliable, when we heard footsteps on the gravel driveway. They were slow, dragging steps, heavy and uneven. Mark stumbled into the edge of the flashlight beam. I almost dropped the light in relief, but the feeling died instantly when I got a good look at him. He was a wreck. His jacket was shredded, hanging off him in ribbons. Deep, jagged scratches gouged his chest and arms, oozing dark blood. He was pale and sweating despite the cold, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But the scariest part was his face. It was completely blank. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and staring straight ahead at nothing. He didn't look at me or Chloe. He just kept walking past us toward the cabin, moving like a machine that had been damaged but left running. "Mark! Oh my God! What happened?" Chloe cried, reaching for him. He flinched violently away from her touch, a low growl vibrating in his chest. It was a deep, resonant sound that seemed to come from a chest cavity much larger than his own, a warning that froze the blood in my veins instantly. We managed to herd him inside the cabin. The air in there felt instantly claustrophobic. Mark walked straight to the stone fireplace and stood there staring at the cold ashes, his back to us. He was shivering violently now. Chloe, despite her terror, went into nurse mode. She grabbed the first aid kit from under the sink. "We need to clean those cuts, Mark. You're losing a lot of blood." He didn't answer. He didn't even seem to hear her. When she tried to gently dab an antiseptic wipe on his arm, he jerked his limb away with shocking speed. He turned his head slowly to look at her over his shoulder. The movement was unnatural, jerky and stiff. In the dim light of the cabin lamps, his eyes looked totally wrong. The pupils were blown wide, swallowing the blue irises, and they reflected the light with a strange, yellowish-green glint like a cat's eyes caught in headlights. "Leave it," he said. His voice was unrecognizable, flat, raspy, and devoid of any emotion. It sounded like stones grinding together deep in his throat. He turned back to the fireplace, ending the conversation. The smell coming off him was wrong, too. Under the metallic tang of fresh blood was something musky and wild, like damp fur and old rotting leaves on a forest floor.
Chloe and I retreated to the small kitchen area, speaking in hushed whispers. We checked the landline phone on the wall. Dead quiet. No dial tone, just static. "We have to drive him to the hospital," I whispered. "He needs stitches, maybe a transfusion." Chloe nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know if he'll let us put him in the car, Alex. Did you see his eyes? He looks gone." We looked back toward the living room. Mark was no longer by the fireplace. The heavy oak front door was wide open, swinging gently in the night breeze. A fresh wave of terror washed over me. We hadn't heard him open it. We grabbed our flashlights again, the dread heavier than before, and stepped onto the porch. We found him crouched near the edge of the porch, hunched over. He was digging in the dirt with his bare hands, dirt flying out behind him. It was frantic, animalistic digging. "Mark, what are you doing?" I called out, my voice shaking. He froze. He didn't stand up. He just turned that awful blank face toward us and snarled, exposing his teeth. It wasn't a human sound. We slammed the door and threw the deadbolt, locking my own brother out in the dark. Guilt pierced through my fear, sharp and agonizing, but the image of his snarling face and those reflecting eyes told me that the person outside was no longer the brother I knew. Locking that door changed everything. We had admitted that the thing outside wasn't Mark anymore. We were trapped. We pushed the heavy sofa in front of the door, adding another layer between us and him. For the first hour, nothing happened. We sat on the floor in the middle of the room, clutching kitchen knives, jumping at every creak of the old wooden cabin. The silence outside was worse than the noise. We knew he was out there, waiting in the dark. Then the sounds started. It began with soft footsteps on the wooden deck, a slow, deliberate pacing around the cabin's perimeter. It sounded heavy, like he weighed twice as much as he did an hour ago. Then came the scratching. Long, slow drags of fingernails or claws against the log walls. It was a testing sound, probing for weaknesses. We tracked the sound as it moved from the front door to the side walls, circling us like prey. Chloe was sobbing silently, her hand clamped over her mouth. I felt sick with fear, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted to break free. This was a nightmare we couldn't wake up from. The air inside the cabin grew hot and stuffy, thick with the metallic smell of our own terror, making it hard to breathe as we waited for the inevitable attack. The physical noises were terrifying, but what came next almost broke my mind. The scratching stopped near the kitchen window. After a long pause, a voice drifted through the thin glass. It was Mark's voice, but distorted, like it was being played on a warped record. "Alex," it whispered, sounding breathy and wet. "Alex, let me in. It's cold out here. Why did you lock the door?" I clamped my hands over my ears. Hearing his voice used like that, a puppet being controlled by something else, was sickening. Chloe looked at me, her eyes wide with horror. The voice changed tone, dropping the pleading act. It became deep and guttural. "Open the door, little brother, or I'll peel this cabin apart, stick by stick, to get to you." Then he slammed his full body weight against the wall. The whole cabin shuddered, dust drifting down from the ceiling beams. We scrambled backward, away from the walls, huddling together in the middle of the room as the pounding continued, accompanied by inhuman snarls. The sheer force of the impacts shook the floorboards beneath us, rattling the dishes in the cupboards and knocking picture frames off the walls, emphasizing the impossible strength of the creature outside. The pounding on the walls suddenly ceased. We held our breath, waiting. The silence stretched, tense and thin. Then there was a massive crash in the living room. The big picture window that looked out over the lake exploded inward in a shower of glass. A dark shape hurled itself through the opening, landing on the rug with a heavy thud. We scrambled back, screaming, shining our flashlights on the intruder. It was Mark, but it wasn't. He was hunched over, his spine curved in an impossible way. His clothes were shredded remnants clinging to a body that seemed larger, broader in the shoulders. Patches of thick, dark, coarse hair covered his arms and neck. His jaw hung slack, unhinged, and blood dripped from his mouth. But his eyes were the worst. They were pure, glowing yellow, devoid of any humanity, locked on us with predatory hunger. He let out a roar that shook the floorboards and lunged towards us. The sound was deafening in the small space, a mix of a bear's roar and a wolf's howl, and the sheer raw violence of it paralyzed me for a split second. Instinct took over. I didn't think, I just reacted. As the creature that used to be my brother sprang, I swung the heavy cast-iron skillet I'd been holding with both hands. It connected with the side of his head with a sickening metallic crack. He howled, a sound of pure rage and pain, and stumbled sideways, crashing into a small table. It didn't stop him, but it bought us a second. Chloe threw a heavy ceramic lamp at him, hitting him square in the chest. He barely seemed to register the impact, shaking it off as he turned back to us, snarling. Blood was running down the side of his face from where I hit him, but in the flashlight beam, the blood looked impossibly dark, almost black. He swiped at me with a hand that looked more like a claw, fingernails lengthened into jagged points. I dodged backward, feeling the wind of the swing against my face. We scrambled toward the kitchen, putting the island counter between us and him. He paced on the other side, his yellow eyes tracking our every move. My hands were numb from the impact of holding the skillet, and my breath came in short, sharp gasps that burned my throat as we tried to keep distance between us. The creature lunged onto the kitchen island, snarling, trying to scramble over it to get to us. I grabbed the only thing within reach, a block of sharp kitchen knives. I didn't want to hurt him, a part of my brain was still screaming that this was Mark, but the monster in front of me wanted to tear us apart. I shoved the wooden block hard, sending it and the knives clattering onto the floor in front of him. He stepped on one of the blades and roared, jerking back. It was enough of a distraction. "The bedroom!" I yelled to Chloe. We bolted for the back bedroom, the only room with a solid, heavy door besides the front entrance. We slammed it shut and threw the deadbolt, just as his heavy body impacted the other side. Wood splintered around the frame, but the lock held. We dragged a heavy dresser in front of the door, panting and crying. We could hear him on the other side, tearing up the living room in frustration, smashing furniture and roaring. We were trapped in a 10-by-10 room, listening to a monster destroy our cabin. The sounds of destruction were horrific, wood snapping, fabric tearing, and glass shattering, all accompanied by those wet guttural snarls that reminded us that the thing outside was pure, mindless rage. Eventually, the noises in the living room died down. We sat huddled in the corner of the bedroom, farthest from the door, clutching each other. The silence returned, but it was worse now because we knew he was still inside. Then came a new sound that made my blood run cold. Thump, thump. Heavy footsteps, not on the floor, but above us, on the roof. He had climbed up the outside logs. Dust and dirt drifted down from the ceiling planks as he paced directly over our heads. He stopped right above the bedroom. We heard him sniffing, loudly, right at the peak of the roof. Then he started to dig. We heard shingles being ripped up, wood splintering. He was trying to tear through the roof to get down to us. We stared up at the ceiling, paralyzed, watching as a small crack appeared in one of the planks and dirt began to pour through. My entire body went rigid with terror as I watched the wood groan and buckle under his assault, realizing there was nowhere left to run if he broke through the ceiling.
The digging on the roof stopped as abruptly as it began. We didn't know why. Maybe the wood was too thick, or maybe he got distracted. We heard him jump down from the roof with a heavy thud on the deck, and then the pacing resumed outside the bedroom wall. That night lasted a year. We couldn't sleep. Every time my eyes started to close, a new scratch on the wall or a low growl from outside jolted me back to terrifying wakefulness. Chloe and I sat knee to knee, sharing body heat and fear. We didn't talk much. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse. We just listened to the thing that used to be Mark stalking us in the dark. The realization that we might die in this room, killed by my own brother, settled deep in my bones. I gripped the heavy metal flashlight like a lifeline, waiting for the door to buckle or the ceiling to cave in. My muscles ached from tension, locked in a permanent state of fight or flight, and the darkness in the room felt alive, pressing against my eyeballs whenever the flashlight beam wavered or dimmed. When the first gray light of dawn finally began to seep through the cracks in the boarded-up bedroom window, I felt a faint glimmer of hope mixed with renewed terror. The noises outside had stopped about an hour before sunrise. We didn't know if he was gone or just waiting in ambush. "We can't stay here another night," I whispered, my voice cracked and dry. "He'll get in eventually." Chloe nodded, her face pale and drawn in the weak light. "The car," she whispered back. "We have to make a run for the SUV." The keys were in my pocket. I had grabbed them off the hook when we first ran inside. The plan was desperate. Move fast, don't look back, get to the car, and drive until we hit civilization. We moved the dresser away from the door slowly, wincing at every scrape of wood on the floor. I put my ear to the door. Silence. I slid the deadbolt back with agonizing slowness. My heart was beating so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest, and my hands were shaking uncontrollably as I gripped the cold brass knob of the bedroom door. I opened the bedroom door an inch, peering into the dim living room. It was trashed. Furniture was overturned, lamps smashed, and the curtains by the broken window were shredded. But the room was empty. We crept through the wreckage, moving toward the front door. The air smelled musky and foul, like wet fur and copper. We reached the pile of furniture we had shoved against the front door and carefully pulled it aside. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the deadbolt. I threw the lock and yanked the door open. The morning air hit my face, cold and sharp. The SUV was parked about 50 feet away on the gravel drive. It looked like the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "On 3, I whispered to Chloe. "Run as fast as you can. Don't stop for anything." I counted down. 1, 2, 3. Go! We exploded out of the doorway, adrenaline surging through our exhausted bodies, our boots pounding on the wooden porch planks as we made a desperate dash for freedom and safety. We burst out of the cabin, sprinting across the frosty grass. My lungs burned with the cold air and adrenaline. The gravel of the driveway crunched loudly under our boots. We were halfway to the car when I heard it, a low, rolling growl coming from the side of the cabin. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. I turned my head while running. The creature was there, emerging from the shadows of the woodpile. In the full light of day, it was even more horrifying. It was massive, hunched forward on legs that seemed bent backward. Its skin was gray and stretched tight over corded muscles, covered in patches of thick, wiry hair. Its face was a ruin of Mark's features, elongated into a snout filled with jagged teeth. Its yellow eyes locked on us, and it let out a roar that shook the trees before charging on all fours. It moved impossibly fast, a blur of gray fur and muscle closing the distance between us. The sheer size of it was staggering, a nightmare brought into the clarity of day, its powerful limbs tearing up the ground as it closed the gap with terrifying speed. Chloe reached the passenger door and yanked it open, diving inside. I fumbled with the key fob, my terrifying fingers pressing the unlock button just as I reached the driver's side. I threw myself into the seat and slammed the door, jamming the key into the ignition. Before I could turn it, a massive impact rocked the SUV. The creature slammed into my door, shattering the window instantly. Glass sprayed across my lap. A massive, clawed hand reached inside, grabbing for my neck. The smell was overpowering, rotten meat and wet earth. I screamed and leaned away, hammering my fist on the horn. The blaring noise seemed to startle it for a fraction of a second. It recoiled slightly, its yellow eyes blinking rapidly. That second was all I needed. I turned the ignition key, and the engine roared to life. I didn't bother with a seatbelt. I just slammed the gear shift into reverse and floored the gas pedal. The tires shrieked in protest against the gravel, kicking up stones as the heavy vehicle lurched backward, tearing the creature's arm away from the broken window frame with a sickening wrench. The SUV shot backwards, tires spitting gravel. The sudden movement threw the creature off balance, ripping its arm out of the broken window. It tumbled onto the driveway with a furious snarl. I spun the wheel wildly, swinging the nose of the car around toward the dirt road, almost taking out a small pine tree. I shifted into drive and hammered the accelerator. We bounced violently down the rutted dirt track. In the rearview mirror, I saw that gray shape rising from the dust, but the road behind us remained empty. We drove in stunned silence for what felt like hours, until the dirt turned to pavement and we saw the first signs of civilization, a small gas station and a few scattered houses. Only then did I let off the gas, my entire body beginning to shake uncontrollably as the adrenaline crash hit me. Chloe started crying again, soft, broken sobs of relief and horror. The mundane sight of a paved road and power lines felt surreal after the nightmare of the woods, a stark reminder of the normal world we almost lost forever. We drove straight to the nearest town's small police station. We sat on hard wooden benches under fluorescent lights that felt too bright, shivering in our jackets. When the sheriff finally interviewed us, we lied. It was an unspoken agreement between me and Chloe made in the silence of that car ride. We told them a bear attacked Mark when he was getting wood. We heard him scream, ran out and saw a massive grizzly dragging him into the woods. We said we panicked, got in the car and drove for help. It was a clean story, a tragic accident that made sense to them. They didn't question why we were so traumatized. Bear attacks are horrifying enough. They launched a search party immediately, helicopters and volunteers combing the woods around the cabin. We sat there, drinking lukewarm coffee from styrofoam cups, knowing they wouldn't find Mark. Not the Mark they were looking for, anyway. The styrofoam cup shook in my hands, spilling hot liquid onto my knuckles, but I was too numb to feel the burn, just staring blankly at a poster on the wall.
And they searched for 3 days. They found evidence that seemed to back up our story. They found Mark's shredded jacket near the woodpile, covered in blood. They found signs of a struggle and heavy animal tracks that they assumed were from a large bear, though one deputy mentioned the stride pattern was unusual. On the 3rd day, they found what was left of him. It was miles from the cabin, deep in a rocky ravine. The sheriff spared us the details, just saying it was clear he hadn't survived the initial attack. They officially closed the case as a fatal bear mauling. Our parents were devastated, broken by the news. We went through the motions of the funeral, standing by a closed casket, accepting condolences from people who talked about what a tragedy it was. Chloe held my hand so tight during the service I thought she might break my fingers. We were the only ones who knew the casket was mostly empty. The scent of funeral lilies was overpowering, sickeningly sweet, and it made me want to scream the truth at everyone in their black suits, but I just stood there, silent as a stone. In the months that followed, Chloe and I drifted away from our other friends. No one else understood. They treated us with kid gloves, the survivors of a terrible tragedy, but they didn't know the half of it. We were bound together by the secret of that night, by the image of those glowing yellow eyes and the sound of that distorted voice whispering through the glass. We spent a lot of time together, mostly just sitting in silence, because being alone was too hard. We'd flinch at loud noises. I couldn't stand to be in rooms with large windows at night. Chloe developed insomnia. She said every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mark's ruined face snarling at her. We were safe in the city, surrounded by people and lights, but the woods had followed us home. The trauma was a shadow that lived in the corners of our eyes, a constant reminder of how thin the veil between our safe world and total nightmare really was. We were veterans of a war no one else knew had happened, carrying invisible scars that ached whenever the sun went down and the shadows stretched out too long. Sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, a horrifying thought would creep in. Had we left him? The creature, it had Mark's face. It spoke with his voice, even if it was twisted. What if there was still a piece of my brother trapped inside that thing? What if when he was scratching at the door, begging us to let him in, some small part of him was truly terrified and asking for help? The guilt was a heavy, suffocating blanket. I tried to tell myself it wasn't him anymore, that he died the moment that thing attacked him by the shed. But the doubt was always there, gnawing at me. Had I saved us from a monster, or had I abandoned my brother to a fate worse than death? I'd look at the scar on my arm from where the broken window glass cut me, a permanent reminder of my cowardice. It was a jagged, ugly pink line on my forearm, and sometimes I'd press on it until it hurt, punishing myself for surviving when my brother hadn't. It's been a year now. Life has mostly gone back to normal on the surface. I'm in college. Chloe moved a few towns over, but we still talk every week. But I know it's not really over. Every now and then I'll read a news story about a hiker going missing in a remote area, or a strange animal sighting in the northern woods that authorities dismiss, and my blood runs cold, because I know what's out there. I know bears don't hunt people for sport. I know they don't mimic human voices. I know my brother didn't just die in those woods. Something else walked out wearing his skin. And sometimes, when the wind howls just right outside my dorm window, I swear I can hear his voice in it, whispering my name, still waiting for me to open the door. I'll freeze, straining to listen, terrified that one night I'll look out the window and see those glowing yellow eyes staring back at me from the darkness of the campus lawn.